Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at the third round of the 1000 GM New York 6-day Summer Invitational being held in New York City. Now, we've already covered the first two games that Levy has played in this tournament, and in this third game, second game of the day, he is playing against the strongest player in the tournament, Maxim Novik, who is a GM from Lithuania, rated 2409. So Levy on 2 out of 2, two very shaky games coming to this third game, and let's jump right into the action. So the game starts with a move e4, and here Levy plays c6. We get d4, d5, and now the move e5. Now, so far in this tournament, Levy has been sticking with his Hikaru. He's been very faithful to this opening. I do think the opening itself is very fundamentally sound, but the fact that Levy is trying to continue to play this in every single game, in my opinion, he's gonna have to tinker a little bit, because I don't think you can get to GM with only one opening. So we get bishop f5. This is, of course, the advanced Hikaru. We have h4. Levy plays h5. Important move, by the way, because if you go e6 after g4, bishop e4, f3, bishop g6, and h5, it's spaghetti-o time. The bishop on g6 is simply trapped. So Levy goes h5, stopping g4, and now we have the move bishop to d3. Levy plays the move queen d7, and here Novik plays the move knight to e2. Levy trades the bishops on d3, and now he plays the move e6. Now, up to this point, pretty standard. Levy is trying to play c5, bring the knight out, and put a lot of pressure on this big white center. We get knight d2. Levy plays c5 here, and now we have the move knight to f3. Levy plays knight c6, and now we get the first interesting decision, which is the move castles. Now, normally you would think white would immediately play c3 to create the classic chain of pawns, but in this position, Novik decides to castle. So what Novik assumes that after takes, even though that white doesn't have the chain of pawns on d4 and e5, because he's getting a knight on d4 with this pawn on e5, he can maybe go f4, f5, and he should be doing quite well. Now, in reality, Levy should have gone for this and played something like knight e7 followed by knight c6, or bishop c5 followed by knight e7 and knight c6, not letting white set up the chain of pawns. Instead, Levy plays knight e7. We get bishop g5, knight g6, and now Novik has no choice but to play this move c3, guarding the pawns on d4 and e5, because otherwise, if you were to play a move like rook a d1, after black takes on d4, knight takes d4, and knight takes e5, black is simply up a pawn in this position. So Novik plays c3. We get bishop e7 from Levy. We get g3 here, logical move, because after takes, now the pawn on g3 supports the pawn on h4 from being captured. Levy plays knight e7. We get the move rook e1, and here Levy starts going in a wrong direction with this move b6. Now, I'm sure Levy will do a recap and will give his own explanation for why he played this, but one of the things that Levy should have been thinking about in this position is, what is the simplest plan to go for? Now, in this position, what black should do is he should trade the pawns on d4 and put this knight on f5, trying to pressure these pawns on d4 and e5 immediately. Now, the reason this makes a lot of sense is because after white plays a move like rook c1 and you castle here, black can still go for g6 to guard all the pawns in the center and on the king side, but the knights are always targeting the central pawns, and one sample line is, say, knight f3, rook c8, knight f4, and after g6, black should be doing relatively fine here, for the simple fact that this knight on f5 is perfectly placed. 1 second, you guys. Let me turn my fan up just a little bit. I do apologize in advance. It is quite hot in this room, so I apologize. Just give me 1 second. And there we go. All right. So in this line, if Levy were to get this position after g6, Levy would be doing quite well here. But Levy, I think, starts overthinking a little bit. He decides that he wants to play this move b6, and at this point, it's very clear that once Levy has rejected the pawn trade on d4 multiple times, he rejected it earlier when white would have had to take back with a knight, and he rejects it here for a second time. It becomes very clear that once you sort of tunnel on certain plans or avoiding certain plans, you're generally not going to follow through. So after b6, we get rook a d1, and here Levy plays move c4. Now, this is a big mistake from Levy, because now black really does not have any way to attack the white central pawns, and white starts to get his pieces on very nice squares. So we get queen f3, knight f5, knight f4, Levy goes g6, and now Novik plays the move knight g2. Now, the reason that white is doing so well here is that white has this knight on g5. This is a very perfect outpost here. You're always pressuring the pawns on f7 and e6. Now, in a lot of French variations, at some point black can play for something like f6, but in this case it does nothing, because after takes a knight to f4, all of these pawns here in the center and on the king side are really being targeted by these knights, and white is simply quite a bit better. So Levy goes knight c7 here. Keep in mind, of course, that now white does not have to worry about this pawn on d4 because the pawn always guards those knights, never actually targeted. So we get b3 here. Good move from Novik, trying to open up the queen side, because at this point Levy has not decided, is he castling king side or is he castling queen side? Not completely clear. So when Novik plays b3, Levy plays rook c8. We get this move rook to b1, and here the move knight g8 is played. Now this is simply a bad move by Levy, but at this point it was really quite clear that Levy's being extremely passive here. He's trying to defend this position, and he doesn't really have a clear-cut plan. Computer actually wants black to trade on b3 and play something like a5, and then maybe castle, maybe go knight g8 later, but simply not let white get this pawn to b4. Because after we get this position with knight g8 and white goes b4, even though you're probably thinking, wait a second, white's not playing on the queen side here, you'll notice that black actually cannot bring the king over easily, because after king d8, b5, king c7, and a4, a5, white is going to force open the a and the b files here, and meanwhile you always have these targets on the king side with all these weak pawns. So after b4, Levy plays knight to h6. We get to move b5 here. Now this is a move that fundamentally makes a lot of sense in my opinion, but is not actually the best move. Now the reason it's not the best move here is that black should go for rook a8 and a6, trying to open up this a file and activate the rook immediately. Levy instead plays queen to e7. We get this move a4 here, and now Levy decides to castle the king. And here Novik plays the move rook a1. Again, logical move, not the best move, but the reason Novik does not play queen f4 here is he is afraid of this move queen to a3, which will target both the pawns on a4 and the pawn on c3 at the same time. So we get rook to a1, and now Levy plays this move rook b8, and this is a horrible move by Levy. He is playing way too passively. What Levy should have played here is exactly what I mentioned before, a move like a6 here with the idea of rook to a8. Let's just say takes rook a8, knight f4, and then rook to a6, or for example queen f4, rook a6, and if f3, you can now go knight g7, g4, and this move rook fa8. Now white is still better here, make no mistake, but it's really important to point out that black has counterplay on the queen side immediately. Because in the game, when Levy goes rook b8, I think that what Levy thought was going to happen is I think he assumed this knight on f5 was very secure here with the knight covering the g4 square, and that white probably was intending to play this move a5. Now the reason that Novik played rook to a1 was very simply to stop queen a3. It was not in fact to push the pawn to a5. So when Levy plays rook b8 here, he's expecting Novik to play a5, and after takes and a move like rook b7 followed by rook b8, white is better here, but black is going to try and play on the b file. So after rook b8, Novik plays the move queen to f4, and now Levy, I think to his horror, realizes a couple of things. First of all, white has no intention of opening the a file with a5, but secondly, white has a very simple plan of playing f3 and g4 to kick this knight away from the f5 square. So Levy goes king h8, we get f3, knight g8, g4, and now let's move knight g7, and here Novik plays queen g3. At this point, Levy goes queen to e8, we get the move knight to f4, and now knight h6 is played by Levy. What Levy is doing here is he's simply trying to put pressure on the pawn on g4 and guard all his pawns here on the king side. If white were to take on h5, after knight takes, and pawn takes, black is going to get this knight to f5, and even though the king looks very weak here, white actually is not really better in this position, and black's king side is surprisingly okay. So Levy has gotten the ideal, or not ideal, but about the best setup he can get in this position with the knights holding here, and now Novik plays the move rook a2. Now this is where we reach a couple of important things, and this, what I'm going to refer to next, is probably something that's a very advanced concept. It's one of those things that unless you're at an intermediate to advanced level, that's very hard to understand, which is at this point Novik has completely controlled the game. He is playing a great game. Levy has no counterplay, cannot do anything on the king side, so you feel like what you're going to do here is bring the rook over, attack on the g file eventually, and win the game. So Novik has played very logical moves up to this point, and now Levy does play the move a6, trying to open up the a file. Now when I refer to one of the most difficult concepts in chess, what I mean by that is that when you've been controlling the game the whole way from start to finish pretty much, you generally want to win the game without giving your opponent any counterplay, because you've been taking away their play. They have no way to be active here, and so when the game starts to shift in another direction, they play something like a6 here to go rook a8, it's very hard to change your mindset. Because what you should do here is now you kind of have to flip the script and find a way to attack and try to break through without trying to control the whole board. Now, Novik at this point, as you can also tell, he's up 20 minutes on the clock, but he is unable to sort of shift the mindset, and he ends up playing this move, rook b1. Now, I believe the correct move here for the computer is to take, and after rook a8, you can play queen g2, rook takes a6, and here you have this move queen to c2. And the reason this is so dangerous for black is that now, let's just say you play a quiet move, like let's just say b5, for example. After g takes h5, you cannot take back because you get mated on h7. If you go knight h to f5 here, after takes, and let's just say takes, for example, in this position, if you ever take the pawn on h4 here, white has queen to h2, and after knight f5, now you end up losing the horse on the h4 square. Again, not easy to spot, very tricky, but this would have been the best way to play the game. Now, keep in mind, as I said, this starts to get very messy. Like in this position, after takes, a lot of stuff is hanging all over the board. Pawn on a4 is weak, rook on a2, pawn on h4 now suddenly, and the knight on f4. All the pieces are kind of a little bit discombobulated, so it's very easy to want to avoid such situations because you've had super control over the game pretty much from the get-go. So instead, we get the move rook to b1 being played by Novik. Here, Levy trades on b5, rook a8, rook b4, and now he plays the move rook a5. Now, one of the great things about this position for Levy here is that he can tunnel on playing for b5 and opening up the a and the b files, whereas white has to try and break through on the king side, but Levy really can't do anything more over here. He's got D's knights on the ideal squares. He can maybe go rook g8 if he has to, but he really is tunneling on this queen side, and if white can break through on the king side, well, so be it. White wins the game. So it's a lot easier for black to play than for white to play. And for that reason, when I was doing my live stream on Kick at the time, I started feeling like at this point there was a good chance Levy would survive the game. So we get rook a b2, Levy takes, we get takes, rook a3, and now this move knight to e2. Now, once again, this is not the best move. The computer wants to play the move queen to e1, guarding the pawn on c3. And if black were to take on g4 here, again, there's this very nasty idea with queen to b1, lining up the legendary triple stack so that you can play rook to b8, but also eyeing this h5 idea with all the threats on the long diagonal as well. Now, keep in mind, if you were to start the game from this position with both players having, say, 1 hour on the clock, there's a very good chance, I think, that Novik might find these moves. But because he's been pressing, gradually increasing the advantage throughout the game without Levy having many opportunities, it's very, very hard to suddenly let the game spin kind of out of control. So therefore, Novik plays the move knight to e2, guarding the pawn on c3. Levy goes queen to a4 here, intending to infiltrate with queen d1 and rook a1. And here we get this move queen to f4 being played by Novik. And Novik offers Levy a draw, shockingly, in this position. Now, there's a lot of play left in this position, and it's a great tragedy that the game ended here in a draw by agreement, because at this point, it's really unclear what would have happened had the game continued. So in this position, black's best move is probably rook b3 to trade off the rooks here. I don't think this is what would have happened, and this is why I say it would have been really, it's a great pity the game didn't continue, because after queen to d1, it would have been really interesting to see if white went to g2 or f2. Computer says after king g2, rook to a1, and knight g3 here, because black does not have any checkmate ideas, and I'll explain the lines in a second, white is actually a little bit better here. One sample line is takes, knight g4, but now after rook to b8, white is actually winning, because when you go queen g1 and king h3, you have no checkmates on h2 or f2. The rook covers both of these squares. Knight covers h1 and f1, so you can't go there either. And your king is now getting checkmated on the back rank. So for that reason, white would be winning. Now, I don't think this would have happened in the game had queen d1 been played. Most likely, we would have gotten king to f2. And I think probably the biggest reason Levy took a draw is that after rook to a1 and rook to b8 here, he probably did not see any way to play for more. For example, queen f1, king to e3. King is very safe here. Knight covers both those checking squares on g1 and c1 here for the black queen. So you can't go to either square. You end up having to go rook back to a8 here. And after takes, knight f7, takes, fg4, rook b7. Apparently, queen f3 leads to a draw. But all these moves are fraught with risk for both sides. One sample line is knight to f5 here, which actually loses the game, because after king f4, takes, and king g5, now white is mating on the 7th rank. And if you check, I block with the horse. You'll have to give up the queen, but there's no way to stop mate on h7. So this game would have been fraught with risk for both players had they continued. So I think that's why Levy took the draw. I mean, both players, I suspect, probably were worried they would be losing here in this position after queen d1 and king f2. But at any rate, it is a huge pity that the game ends in a draw and we don't get to see it played out, because it would have been really exciting. I think there's a good chance that Levy might have actually won. On the flip side of the coin, however, I would argue that for Levy, it's a very, very good save. For a third game in a row, he was losing. This game, he was probably more lost than either of the first two games, and he was playing someone higher rated than him. So to save the draw here and not lose the game is huge, and I think it's a very reasonable decision to take the draw. Now, back to the overall scenario. Again, I would stress what I stressed at the start of the video. I think that if Levy is serious about trying to get the GM title, he cannot continue to play the Caro-Kann opening every single game, because eventually he is going to lose games in these lines where players can get to move 15 or 20 with such pawn structures and very straightforward piece play. Now, that is for another day, of course. Levy does survive. He's able to make the draw in the third game, so all's well that ends well for him. But it is the one thing that I would say is that it seems like Levy is struggling a lot in these Caro-Kanns, and he's really going to have to work hard, assuming that he intends to go for GM with his trainer and come up with some other opening strategies, because I really do not believe that he's going to be able to play this one opening and get away with it all the way up to Grandmaster level. So, on that note, I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap from the third round of the 1000 Grandmaster 6-day Summer Invitational being held in New York. If you are not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below. And we will be back tomorrow with some more recaps. I believe Levy plays rounds 4 and 5. 2 more games. Very, very brutal schedule. Make no mistake about it. But Levy so far is holding up, and we'll see how he does in those upcoming games. So I hope you guys are ready for more recaps of Levy's games. But at any rate, that's going to be all for now. So I hope you guys enjoyed the recap. And I'll see you all tomorrow with some more great stuff here on YouTube. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. Have a good one. Bye.